Thank you very much. May I ask you, and please feel free to answer or not to answer my question. How much sense does it make to open the debate on denuclearization at a time when we are in the middle of the debate of the future, about the future of the question NATO. Of denuclearization, of the future of nuclear weapons? The Secretary General already made a comment which I think reflected a certain skepticism on that. And it's interesting to see how this initiative is resonating in Europe and how it is encouraging a political debate that I think take a different direction from what most people in the US would expect.
Well, this is clearly the penalty I pay for not getting a question at the beginning of my presentation, but it's a fair and important question. Look, President Obama has made clear in the tradition of American presidents dating back to John Kennedy and frankly before, that humanity's goal, as well as America's goal, is a world without nuclear weapons. But he's also made very clear that for as long as there are nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons exist, that nuclear deterrence is going to and must remain a central part of our defense policy. I think it is inevitable that the question of nuclear deterrence would be raised and is raised in the context of the question of transatlantic relations. The government of Poland and the government of Sweden have put forward an issue about this as well. And there are right now bilateral negotiations with respect to reducing the strategic nuclear arsenals of Russia and the United States. You know, you can't put these things, sweep these things under the rug. So how beneficial is it that these issues come up? These issues will inevitably come up, but they need to come up in a way such that we can continue to maintain nuclear deterrence as well as missile defenses as part of our overall defense strategy.
Well, I'd like to open up to you. If you want to make your remarks, short remarks, please, or to ask any questions.
Well, Ambassador, thank you for the hospitality, tremendous hospitality you've shown in hosting this. Thanks to speakers for the excellent presentations. I'm Joe Stein, the Acting Defense Advisor for the U.S. mission to NATO. I'd like to touch on a little bit of Andrew's comments about the false dichotomy between territorial defense and expeditionary, and somewhat link in with the Secretary General's comments this morning about if you're ensuring your own collective security, you must go to where the threat of that security originates. And if I can link that with comments that Secretary Gates just gave recently at the Nixon Center, he talked about the fact that we need to restructure the U.S. national security apparatus to be more effective at helping to build the capacity of other nations to defend their own security interests. We certainly see that with NATO right now and the NATO training mission in Afghanistan, the emphasis given to that NATO training mission in Iraq, which I should point out again that Poland contributes to, not to mention partnering with Afghan security forces in Ghazni province. But even wider than that, we look at maritime security, perhaps building capacity to counter piracy or piracy around the Horn. In a broader context, just like Secretary Gates is talking about the United States, should NATO look at this topic about perhaps increasing its long-term ability to help build security capacity elsewhere to ensure security at home, but also to have more reliable partners elsewhere and perhaps reduce the threat?
Thank you very much.
Comment, because in fact I think that NATO's training activities, education activities, the role in security sector reform and so on have become so important that I would indeed regard them as a strategic task. And I think it should figure in the strategic concept. There should be an action plan for how to even improve it. And I think also the training centers and everything that falls into this context. And I think there may even be an improvement, for mutual information and coordination of the many bilateral activities in this field that member countries conduct. The clearinghouse function of NATO in this field has never worked very well.
Just a chance to give a quick answer on the NATO must go to where the threat emanates. One of the points I was trying to make in my presentation is I think one has to be incredibly careful, as I'm sure most military leaders and government leaders are, to make sure that a NATO response is the right response to where the threat is emanating from. The huge risk, as I perceive it, is that somehow international terrorism ends up being conflated with national insurgency movements. And so therefore, the concept of NATO going out of area to deal with international terrorism, it's just it's a risky space, and that really was the basis of my comments about caution on expeditionary forces. But this brings you into what you just said, the second part, and point I was trying to make right at the end of my remarks. Capacity building in terms of governance, which is especially important in local security, could be a great area for NATO, but especially for NATO-EU cooperation. The EU can bring, as it is theoretically trying to do in Afghanistan, judicial, police training as well, alongside what military forces operating perhaps through NATO, but obviously the same countries in most cases can bring in terms of military training. And I think this local capacity building as a way of dealing with failed states or failing states or vulnerable states, whatever you want to call them, is absolutely the right way to look at it, and maybe a different way of phrasing it from NATO needs to go to where the threat is coming from, which is the first part of your comment.
If I may add one, can you hear me? Yeah. One comment to this. I couldn't agree more on partner capacity building. I mean, I think that's critical. It's a multiplier in terms of what we invest. I spent 4 years at the Marshall Center working in various venues and seeing firsthand what it can deliver. Coming back to Robin's comment, my key message is that we should really try to look beyond the current operations in Afghanistan and keep in mind that maybe the particular approach, counterinsurgency, conflating terrorism with insurgencies and so forth, ought to be rediscussed and revisited. But we should also keep in mind that the United States will continue, at least into the foreseeable future, to sustain a global security optic. And that needs to be reconciled with how the Europeans and other partners, not just within the alliance, not just the European allies, but also partners on the periphery, see this. And I think that, to me, is the gist of it. It's not inventing new tasks for NATO to go out of area and do new missions, but it's actually calibrating the level of ambition of what we're trying to do and allowing other actors, institutions out there to pick up the slack. I simply don't believe that in this resource-poor environment, we can actually afford to build, a new grand concept that can take us everywhere, and we will do everything, and NATO will be doing anything from more fuel-efficient tanks to fight global warming, I'm just saying this tongue-in-cheek here, to other missions. I think there are other institutions in play that can do it very well, and I keep coming back to the EU. I mean, the European Union has to mature as a security actor, and in that case, I think NATO has a very clear pathway of trying to encourage it in a way that it cooperates and complements to what we're doing.